After we hear from the chief political writer at Spiked Online, friend of the show, Brendan O'Neill. A very, very good morning to you.
Hi, Julia. How are you doing?
Very well indeed. Very much appreciate you joining us. I must point out, by the way, I'm doing your Spiked Online podcast tonight, live for Spiked members, I think from 7 o'clock tonight. So very much looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
That'll be great.
A little bit of a plug, why not? Don't forget that. Right, let's talk. I mean, I don't even know where we start, but I think we should start with this new poll. 2/3 of people, according to a Survation poll carried out and on the front page of The Sun today, believe the country is broken, heading in the wrong direction. The poll also suggests this is a poll of red wall seats, the ones that went to Boris in 2019 and then basically went to Labour last July at the election. It shows that actually reform would sweep through that red wall in any election, and obviously pretty bad news for Labour. But what do you make of so many people in this country feeling that the country's broken and heading in the wrong direction?
Yeah, that's really worrying. You know, I try to avoid doomerism. I don't like to be too down about things. And, you know, Britain is still a great country with great people and great potential. I think that's a given for many of your listeners, as well as for a lot of people out there. But it feels like the country is being let down by the political class. That's the problem. And it's especially being let down by the Labour government right now. Labour is not realising the potential of this country. It is not bigging this country up. In fact, it's very often doing the opposite. It's really squandering all the wonderful things about this country that could potentially be brought to the surface. So I think people feel that things are broken, things aren't working, things aren't doing what they should be doing.
I don't think they feel that. I think things aren't working. I spent ahead of the year to the last general election, asking all the cabinet ministers and ministers who came on my show, tell me a public service that works.
Yeah.
And it's sort of terribly embarrassed long pause.
You know, I find myself thinking that all the time now. And I did wonder if it's because I'm getting old, but I do find myself thinking...
We're just becoming curmudgeons.
Yeah. Why is the pavement always cracked? Why are there so many bumps? Why are the trains late? Why is this bus service not running? I do find myself thinking that. And it does feel like we're being raided for more and more money. They're constantly taking more money of us, and yet things are getting worse.
Yeah, well, if you spend 100 billion a year servicing the interest on your debt, that will happen because you haven't got that money to spend on other things. But I think people have felt that a long time. But what is interesting is I think, you know, the people in charge, and I feel this with the Conservatives and Labour, and I think Lib Dems and actually an awful lot of the parties too, this idea that they actually don't really like our country very much. They think we're a bit embarrassing, our past is embarrassing, our values embarrassing, that a lot of us are awful bigots because we've got an issue with mass uncontrolled immigration and you know, another topic we'll talk about, you know, positive discrimination for ethnic minorities, anti-white discrimination. And they just don't like us. They don't like our history. They don't like our country. They don't like our culture. They don't like us very much. So why on earth would they try and boost the country?
That's exactly it. You know, this is partly an economic problem. Money is not being spent in the right way, but it's also a cultural problem. They just don't believe in this nation. They think our history is one crime after another. They think the people in this country are all racist and a bit stupid. We're all gammon. They think we need to bring labour from overseas because people in this country are too lazy and feckless. They just if you think like that, you're going to let the country go to rack and ruin because you don't care. All we're asking for is a political class that actually loves the country that it rules, and that we used to have that in the past, whether you agreed with them or disagreed with them. They tended to like Britain. We don't have that at the moment.
No, absolutely. And again, we get that with the sort of that desperate urge. And there's reports today about, you know, this government trying to take us back into the EU by the back door, aligning our rules and laws with EU rules and laws, but then still wanting a free trade deal with America. I'm not sure you can do both, by the way, and just undermining that public vote, totally just ignoring that public vote. But then we have the Tories ignoring that public vote, saying we want to control of immigration, and Boris Johnson having the Boris wave of 1.2 million people being given visas in 1 year. I mean, you know, not what voters asked for. In fact, what voters expressly said they didn't want, but just being ignored all the time. Let's talk about something that people can't ignore, especially on the streets of Birmingham. That's that bins not being collected for over a month. There's threats that this bin strike could actually spread nationwide by the Unite Union. Labour the union has basically said we are not going to do a deal. They've rejected almost unanimously this deal that was on the table from Birmingham City Council. What should happen? Should the army be sent in? Should everybody be sacked? I mean, because I think that trade unions do play an important role in our country still, and a lot, especially for people in jobs where they haven't got sort of unique skills which they can sell individually, and it's only by working together. And yet, I also just don't think it's acceptable for people's bins not to be collected for a month.
Exactly right. I think trade unions can play an important role. I support the right to strike, and I think working people deserve a good wage and good working conditions. And I think we too often look down our noses at rubbish collectors, even though they do such an incredibly important...
I never do. Honestly, I wrote a whole piece the other day about they're more essential personnel than most of us.
Absolutely. I think you and I talked during the lockdown, Julia, about how if they stopped working, then the lockdown would be over straight away, because what would happen to the country? Well, we can see what would happen to the country right now in Birmingham. It's horrible what's happening there. But, having said all that, I do think there are certain things that shouldn't be allowed to happen in 21st century Britain. And one of them is piles of rubbish on the streets. It's unhygienic. It's unsafe. There are rats roaming around. And who is suffering the most as a result of this? Working class communities, poorer communities, where this rubbish is stacking up and it's a threat to the local people. So something needs to be done. The army needs to be brought in, or someone needs to be brought in to clear this rubbish, and then they can carry on their talks with the trade union.
I'm going to talk to a local councillor in Birmingham in a few minutes' time. And actually, it's interesting, some pictures that the Guido Fawkes site put out of some drone imagery of the Unite headquarters in Birmingham, their bin area, the big, massive big bins, all very clean and pristine. Their bins are definitely being collected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tells you everything.
It's the whole two-tier thing again. People feel that two-tier sensation on so many issues right now, not just law and policing, but also things like this, where we're surrounded by rubbish and services that don't work, whereas people higher up the chain have got everything they need.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's also talk about two-tier. Let's talk about the NHS. We've had some extraordinary stories about police and lots of whistleblowers, and then police chiefs being very blatant and open about the fact that they are basically fast-tracking ethnic minority candidates over white candidates, even not allowing white candidates to apply, not giving them any help with the interview process, and then black candidates or Asian candidates getting that help. We had a story here yesterday about one police service being sent out to basically into largely Muslim areas to get Muslim people to sign up, even if they actually could barely speak English, who were relatively new arrivals for the police. I mean, absolute absurdities. The latest revelation on public service, NHS trusts fast-tracking ethnic minorities to top jobs, and basically making sure there was an ethnic minority on the shortlist and people being given extra help. And again, that choice where if you've got two candidates the same, as if any two candidates would ever be exactly the same, your priority should be given to the ethnic minority candidate. I mean, this is what we used to just call racism, but apparently this is good racism, so it's okay.
Yeah, I think this is a disaster. This is a disaster for every community in Britain. It's bad for the white community, the white working class community, or the white middle class community, because it means they're being overlooked. I think it's bad for ethnic minority communities too, because there's always going to be that suspicion. Well, are you in this position because of the color of your skin? Did you get this position in an undeserving way? And that's going to generate suspicion of people in those positions, and sometimes even resentment.
Yeah, and totally undermining. It's the same way as quotas for women. We don't need quotas.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you play the politics of race. You always stir up racial tension. It might not be like the racial tensions we had in the past, where there were riots on the streets and all sorts of other violent acts, but you will create a simmering resentment within society, because you almost pit one community against another in racial terms, and that's a recipe for conflict.
And again, it's this idea that, obviously we don't want people, whether for their religious or whether they're woman religious views or their ethnicity, to not be getting a job, but those aren't any reasons that are remotely relevant to them getting a job. It is utterly bizarre that you kind of solve one problem by creating a whole new problem. You just say that, and we've discussed it so many times, that wasn't how we were brought up. We were brought up to try and be colourblind rather than to be obsessed with it, as these people clearly are. And again, if diversity was our strength, and this would actually make all our public services and everything work better, Well, the proof would be in the pudding by now already, wouldn't it? And it ain't already been there. Let's talk just one final question. I want to ask you about these horrific attacks on prison officers by Hashim Abedi, the brother of the Manchester Arena attacker, a terrorist. Absolutely horrific injuries certainly for two of these police officers. Amazing they survived. But the thought now that Anjem Chowdhury, the hate preacher who's behind bars, was in prison, that he may have inspired this attack. Got prison officers fearing being beheaded. We've got an expert on prison extremism in Atchison who's saying that this bomber should be basically isolated, even if he goes mad. And the absurd situation, as pointed out by Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, that 45% of prisoners at one jail, HMP Whitemoor, now identify as Muslims. The vast majority of those are people who've converted while inside. Something is going horribly wrong behind bars, is it not?
Massively wrong. It seems to me that in some prisons or some wings of prisons, radical Islamists almost have free reign. It's almost like they run the area, and they can even convert people, as that quote says, convert or get hurt. You know, they have that kind of power, and they should not have that power, not even in society, never mind inside a prison where they're being punished. I really agree with the families of the Manchester Arena victims who said that Abedi should be in a cell for 23 hours a day. He should be let out for 1 hour a day for exercise with a prison guard, and that's how he should live the rest of his life. He should not have privileges. He should not be able to use the kitchen.
Yeah,
he should
make
not be
his own food. What on earth was going through their minds?
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And punishment has to be for people like that. Now, I'm soft on some issues. I think if it's a young mother who's committed an offence, then maybe we can take that into consideration. And some prisons should be softer than other prisons. I absolutely agree.
Well, we already have that, yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to the radical Islamist mass murderers of children, they need to be punished for the rest of their lives. So we need to get tough and really isolate these prisoners.
Absolutely. People keep forgetting the point of prison is fundamentally number one job, punishment. Brendan O'Neill, always good to talk to you, Chief Political Writer at Spiked, and I look forward to talking to you later.